This is Saturday Agenda.
Welcome to the program. I'm Chris Kenny. Later, we'll have a look at domestic politics and whether both sides of politics are promising us more than they can really afford, than we can really afford. And we'll look at why they're campaigning in Queensland. But first, I want to look at the Middle East situation. The world is following this very closely as violence continues to flare in the Middle East. We have rocket fire and air attacks in southern Israel and in the Gaza Strip. We've had deaths on both sides, and there are fears mounting that Israel will need to mount a ground incursion into Gaza. Now, of course, this is critical for global security and peace in the Middle East. It's also something that takes a lot of interest from Australians, many Australians who have relatives in Israel and, of course, in the Palestinian territories. To try and make sense of what's going on there, I'm joined now from Canberra by the Israeli ambassador to Australia, Yuval Rotem. Thanks for joining us, Yuval.
Thank you very much. Good morning to you.
Look, Ambassador, I wonder if you could first just bring us up to date. What's the latest information you have from Israel overnight?
Well, overnight there was a continuation of the rockets fired from Gaza over Israel. A significant threshold was crossed when, for the first time since 1970, rockets were fired at Jerusalem. And also a few rockets were fired into major cities around Tel Aviv. There is no doubt that there was also an important visit of the Egyptian Prime Minister in Gaza to see if there is a way he can help to stop this escalation to go further. This is a situation, and the rockets are not stopped. So we have to be very calculated in the way that we are going to pursue this operation further to make sure that no more rockets are going to be fired against Israel.
You mentioned the Egyptian President Mohamed Morsi. Of course, he's of the Muslim Brotherhood, and there's a lot of expectation that he is the one who can influence Hamas to stop the rocket fire, to restrain them. But even the ceasefire arranged for his visit didn't hold, so that's not very encouraging, is it?
Well, any engagement is encouragement at this stage, Chris. It's important to realize that Egyptian is not just the most important Arab country, but the most influential one. And that's the reason why I think any engagement from the Egyptian should be very welcome by everyone. And if Egypt can mobilize more entities and countries in the neighborhood to see if there is building a coalition to bring this to an end, I think that's going to be very much welcome. No one at this stage see any enthusiasm to go with this further escalation. But the basic line, Chris, needs to be known. The rockets need to be stopped, to be fired against Israel.
So I'll come to that again in a moment, the rockets that is, but firstly, at this stage, do you hope that a ground incursion can be avoided?
I mean, it's not a question of hope, it's a question of reality on the ground. I mean, if those who advise us to exercise restraint, and I think we are very welcome to listen to all those friends of Israel around the world, the question is, if we exercise restraint and the rockets continue to come all the way from Gaza, how we are going to stop it? So I'm not here in the business to provide ideas to all those guys on the ground from the Israeli side how to do it. I just need to tell you the one thing and one message. That has to be stopped. The rockets from Gaza by Hamas need to be stopped. And there are many ways to do it. At this stage, it's not there, the ground operation. But in 2009, as far as you know, not by choice, by default, we went into Gaza.
Yes, now, I think for a lot of people who haven't followed this closely, the escalation in violence in the last couple of days will come as a bit of a shock because there hasn't been a lot of publicity in the lead up to it of the rocket fire that southern Israel has had to put up with. Now, of course, the background here is that Israel withdrew from Gaza in 2005, withdrew troops from Gaza as well as settlements and handed it over effectively to the Palestinians. Now, since then, you've put up with over 8,000 rockets being fired into southern Israel, and of course you reached the point where Israel decided to strike back. I just want to go to the vision now of the very surgical assassination, it's being called, of the Hamas military leader, which sparked the latest violence. And we can see that the Israeli military deliberately took him out, and this is because he is the man overseeing the rocket fire. Now, this is described as an assassination, Ambassador. How would you describe it?
Well, I describe it as elimination of someone who is the mastermind of the rocket attacks against Israel, someone who has blood on his hands. And I think that this practice of elimination people like that is basically very important. I want to remind you that some other countries in the region, including Afghanistan and Iraq, sometimes in Pakistan, sometimes in Yemen, many countries are basically employing the same tactics. These guys need to be eliminated. If there is a way we can think about having a different chapter in the Middle East and in Israel-Palestinian relationship. These guys are not basically pursuing the purpose of peace, and this is not Mother Teresa. He has nothing to do with human rights. He has nothing to do with peace or reconciliation. This guy has been the mastermind behind so many attacks against Israeli, and he has a lot of blood of Israeli on his hand. Now, yeah, please.
I think, I mean, the tragedy here, though, of course, is no matter how surgical your strikes attempt to be, civilians get killed. Civilians have been killed in this instance on both sides, and on the Israeli side and the Palestinian side. Do you view that the Palestinian people support this Hamas leadership, or is it the Hamas leadership alone who are intent on continuing the rocket strikes even without the support of their people?
Chris, I cannot speak on behalf of Hamas here. I'm speaking on behalf of Israel. I cannot go into their calculation. And I can understand and sympathize with the people in Gaza, because we do not have a war with the people in Gaza, and we don't have a war with Muslims. We have a war with Hamas. Hamas is a movement that is the commitment to destruction of Israel, elimination of Jewish people. Their doctrine recognize no reconciliation and no peace with Israel. And that's the reason that we have this kind of engagement with Hamas for quite a while. Now, Hamas deliberately putting their own weapons in a populated area in order to maximize, on one hand, casualties, and the other hand, international sympathy. So those who are covering the story from Gaza, maybe they can file one story about this idea when Hamas is putting the launching site to fire rockets against Israel in vicinity to mosque, to hospital, and children. They're using the whole population as a shield to targeting ours. And this is the dilemma of Israel when Israel needs to stop the rockets fired against Israel.
Now, the Israeli Defence Forces are now calling up extra reservists. Do you know whether any Israelis will be caught up in this, either in Israel or heading home from Australia?
Well, I don't know about specific individuals' issues here, but when we have a call-up, as you describe it, I mean, I guess that some Israelis overseas are going to cut short the visit or the business and go back to Israel to do the job. This is basically, unfortunately, the nature and the life of Israelis, that every few years we need to defend ourselves in basically seeing or stopping these kinds of violence and terrorism and attack over us.
I want to ask you also about the role of Iran in what's happening at the moment. It seems that a lot of the rockets, at the very least, are supplied by Iran, and of course we know that the Iranians have supplied many arms to Hezbollah, who are massed on your northern flank.
Well, Syria and Iran are the main core for supplying long and medium-range missile to Hamas and Hezbollah, and that's basically constitute a major strategic threat. When Hamas is equipped with Fajr 5, Iran-made missile, and this missile and rocket is fired against Israel to Tel Aviv and to Jerusalem, I don't think you give too many policymakers a room of maneuvering how to respond to that. And that's basically a major issue, because it's exactly the role of Iran, undermining any chance for peace in the Middle East.
Well, now that the US election is out of the way and you don't have to be careful about partisan politics, can you tell us whether you think that Barack Obama has been strong enough on Iran and trying to restrain their role in the region?
I think the President of America, Barack Obama, has made very clear throughout the last few years his his basically stated goal that Iran will not get nuclear, and there is a policy of constraint is not basically, or containment is not basically a policy of America. So I think the very fact that he was able to mobilize a very serious coalition to impose sanctions never before have seen in the world theater, I think that's a very, very significant move to isolate Iran and to send the right message.
All right, Ambassador, thanks very much for joining us today, and we can only hope that the rocket fire and the airstrikes can be brought to a halt sometime soon.
Thank you very much, please.
That's Ambassador Yuval Rotem, the Israeli ambassador to Australia, bringing us up to date with the situation in the Middle East. We'll obviously keep you up to date with that issue throughout the weekend on Sky News. There is a rally tomorrow at the Israeli embassy in Canberra, where Israeli citizens will be rallying in support of their country. I've not been made aware of any on behalf of the Palestinian people, but no doubt we will see some sort of public statement from them in Australia in the days to come. As I say, many Australians, of course, have relatives in Israel. Many Australians have relatives in the Palestinian territory, so we have a direct connection to this, as well as, of course, the very real threat to global security that we're seeing unfold in the Middle East at the moment. When we come back, we'll talk about domestic politics.